Kazakhstan is a country of extremes. It's the ninth largest country in the world, a giant that covers an area nearly equal to all of Western Europe combined. Imagine stretching it across the map. From Portugal to Poland, it's the same size. If you laid it over the continental US, it would extend from San Diego in the southwest all the way to St. Louis in the east. And yet, despite this colossal geographic size, Kazakhstan remains one of the emptiest nations on Earth. In 2024, its population only just crossed 20 million. Fewer people than the U.S. state of Florida, spread across a landmass 16 times larger. That gives Kazakhstan a population density of just 7.4 people per square kilometer, the 11th lowest density in the world, and the second lowest in all of Eurasia, behind only Mongolia. This emptiness looks even stranger on the map. Every piece of land that surrounds Kazakhstan is more crowded. Russia to the north, Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan to the south, Xinjiang, China to the east. Kazakhstan is a demographic void, like the Tibetan Plateau, the Sahara Desert, or the Amazon Basin. Kazakhstan's emptiness isn't because it lacks resources, quite the opposite. 11% of Kazakhstan's territory is arable land, much of it in the northern steppe. That's 296,000 square kilometers of farmland, larger than the entire United Kingdom. This ranks Kazakhstan 11th worldwide in total arable land. On a per-person basis, it's an outlier. 15,450 square meters of farmland per Kazakh citizen, the highest in the world. For comparison, agricultural giants like Australia, Canada, and Argentina all rank lower. Water resources are abundant, 108 billion cubic meters annually, more than countries with much larger populations like South Korea, Tanzania, Iraq, or Afghanistan. Major waterways include the Sirdarya River, fed by glaciers in the Tian Shan Mountains, and major lakes like Lake Balkhash, the 15th largest by surface area in the world. With this much farmland and fresh water, Kazakhstan should support a far larger population. Instead, it remains one of the emptiest populated regions in the world. The answer lies in its modern history. The 20th century was a near-continuous catastrophe. Kazakhstan's story begins in 1465, with the founding of the Kazakh Khanate, a nomadic empire that stretched across the Eurasian steppe from the Caspian Sea to the Tian Shan Mountains. Meanwhile, the Russian state was coalescing around Moscow, and by the 1600s, Russian expansion pushed south toward the steppe frontier. To protect themselves from Kazakh raids and to secure overland trade with China, the Russians built a line of forts along the forest steppe boundary from the Caspian to the Tian Shan. By the 19th century, the Russian Empire conquered Central Asia outright. To secure control, they encouraged mass resettlement of Russians and Ukrainians into Kazakhstan, especially after the Trans-Ural Railway was completed in 1906. By the first Russian census in 1897, there were already 4.1 million Russians in modern Kazakhstan, about 11% of the population, while Kazakhs still formed the majority with 3.4 million people, 83%. But this balance would not last. Tensions exploded in 1916 when Tsarist Russia tried to conscript Muslim Kazakhs into the army during World War I. A mass revolt broke out. The Russian Empire responded with brutal force. Between 100,000 and 270,000 Kazakhs and Kyrgyz were killed. Hundreds of thousands fled into China, beginning the Kazakh diaspora. When the Russian Empire collapsed in 1917, Kazakhstan was thrown into deeper chaos. During the Russian Civil War, Kazakhstan suffered another devastating blow. From 1917 to 1922, famine spread across the region. Between 400,000 and 750,000 Kazakhs died. This wiped out 10 to 19% of the Kazakh population. Combined with continued Russian settlement, this further eroded Kazakhs' demographic majority. By the Soviet census of 1926, Kazakhs had already shrunk to 58.5% of Kazakhstan's population, while Russians doubled to 21% and Ukrainians rose to 14%. This was Kazakhstan's darkest hour. In 1930, the Soviet regime forcibly ended Kazakh nomadism. Herding was banned, families were forced into collective farms, and livestock and grain were seized. In 1930 to 31, at least one-third of Kazakhstan's grain and one-third of its livestock were confiscated to feed Moscow and Leningrad. Entire districts were blacklisted for failing quotas, meaning no trade, no food, no escape. The result? One of the deadliest man-made famines in human history. Between 1.5 and 2.3 million people died in Kazakhstan. At least 1.3 million Kazakhs perished, 42% of the entire Kazakh population. Other groups, like Ukrainians in Kazakhstan, lost 36% of their numbers. Another 665,000 to 1.1 million Kazakhs fled, many shot by Soviet border guards as they tried to escape to China. Between the censuses of 1926 and 1937, the Kazakh population fell from 3.6 million to just 2.1 million. In 15 years, Kazakhstan lost over half its people. For the first time, Kazakhs became a minority in their own homeland. Then came the war. Between 1941 and 1945, Kazakhstan lost 660,000 people, 10.7% of its population. At the same time, Stalin forcibly deported new minorities into Kazakhstan. 400,000 Volga Germans, 1941. Crimean Tatars, 1944, accused of Nazi collaboration. By 1959, the demographics were stark. Kazakhs, 30%. Russians, 42.7%. Ukrainians, 8.2%. Germans, 7.1%. Kazakhstan had become a Eurasian colony, the only Soviet republic where the titular nationality was outnumbered by Europeans. The Soviet Union reshaped Kazakhstan's geography in three devastating ways. The Virgin Lands Campaign, 1950s to 60s, led by Khrushchev to turn northern Kazakhstan into a second Ukraine. Millions of Russians and Ukrainians were resettled. Kazakhstan became a major wheat producer, but at a cost. By the 1990s, 60% of pasture land was degraded, overplowed, and turning to desert. The Semipalatinsk test site, Polygon, established in 1949, area size equals Slovenia. Over the next 40 years, the Soviets detonated 456 nuclear weapons here. That's nearly 25% of all nuclear tests in world history. At least 1.5 million people exposed to radiation. Kazakhstan remains the most heavily nuked place on Earth. The Aral Sea disaster, once the fourth largest lake in the world, same size as West Virginia. In the 1960s, Soviet irrigation canals diverted its two main rivers, the Amu Darya and Sir Darya, to cotton fields in Uzbekistan. The Aral shrank by 90% by 2007. Salinity tripled. Fisheries collapsed, 43,000 tons in 1960, zero by 1980s. Ports stranded dozens of kilometers from the shore. Toxic dust storms from the dry seabed spread salt and pesticides across Central Asia. Climate shifted. Summers grew hotter, winters colder, rainfall fell. Dust settled on Tian Shan glaciers, causing them to melt 12 times faster than before. If glaciers vanish, the Sir Darya will dry up, crippling Kazakhstan's water supply. Kazakhstan inherited a poison-scarred landscape that would haunt its independence. When the USSR collapsed in 1991, Kazakhstan suddenly became independent, but it inherited immense challenges. Demographics: 6.2 million Russians, 900,000 Ukrainians, 960,000 Germans, 323,000 Tatars. Kazakhs themselves only 40% of the population. Economy: command economy collapse. GDP fell, inflation soared. Population exodus: between 1993 to 2002, 2.1 million people left Kazakhstan. Russians, Russia. Germans, Germany, using law of return. Ukrainians, Ukraine. Tatars, Crimea. Many struggled abroad. Kazakh Germans, Russified for centuries, often didn't even speak German, making integration difficult. Fertility collapse. 1989, 2.84 children per woman. 1999, 1.8 children per woman, one of the world's lowest. Russian women, 1.38. Kazakh women, 2.5. This divergence meant non-Kazakh populations declined faster. Population crash: 1993 peak, 17 million. 2002 low, 14.9 million. A 12% decline. This was Kazakhstan's fourth demographic collapse in a century. After the 1916 revolt, the 1920s famine, the 1930s famine, and World War II. Kazakhstan's fortunes turned around thanks to oil. Kashagan oil field, discovered 2000. Largest oil find in 30 years. 13 billion barrels recoverable reserves. Development cost, $116 billion. World's most expensive energy project. Pipelines. Built to connect Caspian fields to China and to the Russian Black Sea port of Novorossiysk. By 2023, 12th largest oil producer worldwide, 11th largest exporter. $35 billion in oil exports. 2022. $370 billion in foreign investment since 1991, mostly in oil, uranium, and mining. Economic growth. By 2006, Kazakhstan made up 60% of Central Asia's GDP. Fertility recovery. By 2021, 3.3 children per Kazakh woman, highest since the 1970s. Population pyramid, whole in 18 to 32 age group, 1990s collapse. Boom in less than 15 group, 2000s recovery. By 2013, Kazakhstan regained its 1993 population of 17 million. By 2024, surpassed 20 million for the first time. UN projects 24 million by 2050, with density rising to 8.8 per square kilometer, higher than Russia's today. This is alarming given Russia's invasions of Georgia, 2008, Crimea, 2014, and Ukraine, 2022. Geopolitical risks. Kazakhstan exports 80% of its oil through Russian pipelines. Dependency. Member of Russian-led alliances, CSTO, military, Eurasian Economic Union. In January 2022, Kazakhstan even called in Russian troops to help quell domestic protests. Kazakhstan is trying to balance lean too far west, risk Russian invasion, lean too far Russia, risk Western sanctions, economic collapse. Its independence is still fragile. Kazakhstan is a land of paradoxes, as large as Western Europe, but emptier than Namibia. 11th most farmland in the world, but scarred by desertification. 108 billion cubic meters of water, but threatened by shrinking glaciers and the Urals collapse. The most nuked land on Earth, yet still fertile enough to feed millions. A country that lost half its people in the 20th century, but now has one of the youngest populations in the world, with 40% under 25. The question is simple. Can Kazakhstan finally break free from the shadows of its tragic history? Or will the 21st century bring yet another catastrophe to the vast, empty heart of Eurasia?